Welcome to another episode of Out of the Woodwork podcast, brought to you by Axminster Tools with me, Sean Evelegh. In today's episode, I meet renowned designer and craftsman Sebastian Cox. Sebastian's passion for sustainable design is channeled through his London-based design studio and workshop, which he runs with his wife Brogan. Sustainability is at the forefront of his process, with his furniture and homeware designed with what he describes as a nature-first perspective. So Sebastian, thank you for joining me. I'm a really big fan of your work, so I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so for a lot of people that don't know you and your work, can you give us a brief background on what you do and how you got started?
So my name's Sebastian Cox. I'm based in South London. I'm a furniture maker, but also designer, environmentalist. And we have a workshop that's very driven by a very strong set of values. So what we make is equally as important as why and how we make it. We are very driven by environmental issues and our specific area of interest is around using British wood, which sounds like quite a small thing, but actually in the context of the UK and the materials and the things we use and import, I think it's quite an important big thing. So there's two statistics that really drive the business. The first one is that since the Second World War, woodland cover in the UK has doubled, but biodiversity within woodlands has decreased dramatically. And the second one is that we import nearly 90% of our wood, and the only country in the world that imports more wood than us by volume is China. If you were to take and solve the second problem, you would also solve the first, because managed woodlands harbour more biodiversity. And the best way to bring woodlands into management is to use wood from British woodlands. So we're really, as a business, trying to target those things. And along the way, we make really nice things, beautiful products and fun things to make. So yeah, we're extremely driven by, principles other than just the joy of working with wood, which is of course important, but sometimes that feels secondary to our main objectives.
Were you always so passionate about sustainability, or is it something that has evolved over time?
I became very passionate about that, sort of the issues around sustainability when I was at university. I suppose left home, started to make decisions about my own consumption, decided what food I was going to buy, what clothes I was going to buy. I became very aware of, the degradation of nature during my upbringing. And then I sort of realized that actually not only was I becoming a consumer, but I was studying a making course, which was, inherently going to make more stuff in a world that was already has too much stuff. So I was kind of challenged by that. So, during university, I really started to take an interest in how the new things that I was going to be added to this already full world, how I could take responsibility for that. So, and I'm now 35, so I was studying probably 12, 15 years ago, something like that. So, that since then I've been very driven by those factors.
And what training did you have in furniture making?
Yeah, so I went straight from school, I did a bit of traveling, and then went to university and studied furniture design and craftsmanship, which was a 50-50 design and make course. And initially I did that because I was more interested in the making part, but then I actually fell in love with the academic side of things during my studies, and then actually went on to do a master's afterwards in sustainable design. So kind of, I think I'm a real advocate for university courses that offer craft-based approaches, because it sort of captures people who maybe don't think they're academic and then brings them into a world which can have an academic slant and has room for deep thought and, discussion and debate. So that was my personal experience. I really didn't think I was an academic person, but ended up doing an MA and getting a distinction in it, and then subsequently writing manifestos. And I'm currently, currently toying with the idea of writing a book. So it's sort of funny how just an interest in carpentry can take you down a route like that. Yeah. If it's there, and that's the sad thing, is that those sorts of courses aren't necessarily there anymore.
Yeah, well, if you do write a book, I'll be very interested in reading that. So make one.
Send you a copy. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So right after university, did you set up on your own? And what was your big break, would you say?
Yeah. So I actually exhibited at the London Design Festival during my MA. So I hadn't quite finished. I finished my undergrad and I was just coming up to writing the dissertation for my MA. And I exhibited at what was then called Tent London, which is now known as the London Design Fair, or it certainly was pre-pandemic. I think it's still going. It's in the old Truman Brewery in Brick Lane. And
Okay.
yeah, and I was showing some product which I was developing for my MA, and a shop. Three very glamorous women came along and started like pulling my products about and sort of talking about them in French, and I was kind of using my best school French trying to understand what they were saying, and they were being very assertive and all that stuff. And then they basically placed an order.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was terrified. Absolutely intimidated by these, clearly extremely experienced women who obviously, their role was, they were buyers, obviously, and I didn't really know what a buyer was. Anyway, they asked me for the prices, which I made up on the spot pretty much because I was not expecting to sell anything. And I think I had a rough idea, but anyway, of course, vastly underpriced them. And they ordered 24 lights and 24 hat stands, I think. So it's like my first order was 48 pieces, and I was still studying. Yeah. So I had to apply to the university for an extension on my MA to delay the dissertation. And they said that that was one of the best excuses they'd had for a dissertation delay. And, so yeah, I was in business suddenly, and I had to beg, steal and borrow. I had to use the university workshops, which was not permitted for commercial reasons, obviously. I think I'm okay to say that now, 10, 15 years on. But so I had to basically do that. So yeah, that was my big break. And that was and then suddenly I was in business. I traded for a little while on those kinds of things. But even when I started, as most businesses do, you don't have the kind of freedom to immediately do exactly what you want to do. But I was very determined that I wasn't going to make cabinets out of MDF. I really wanted to pursue the solid wood, British wood thing from the start. So I used to fit floors, fit reclaimed parquet floors to make my bread and butter money. And then I would reserve my workshop time for specifically those things that I did want to make.
Yeah. Was it a struggle right after you got the big break? You got these orders coming in and you made them in the university workshop. But as you left university, I assume you set up your own workshop. And how was it growing a workshop from scratch? Because I've seen pictures of your workshop at the moment. It's very impressive, but I can't imagine it was like that right at the beginning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is the hardest thing, isn't it? Setting that workshop up. And so I was very lucky. My mum rents a farmhouse, which has some outbuildings. So a friend from university and myself saved up some money and bought some secondhand machinery and actually a lot of stuff from Axminster. Thanks, guys. And kitted out our workshop with the very basics, started doing work. Like I say, I was fitting floors to supplement my income, and you can earn quite good money fitting reclaimed floors. So I'd often go down to London, fit the floors, sometimes I'd earn a few £1,000 in a week or two, and then come back to the workshop which was in Lincolnshire near the university, and invest in a new bit of kit or whatever, and gradually built it up like that. Basically, I worked extremely hard. I think that's the thing that you have to do is you have to, unless you have all that money set aside to just buy loads of lovely new kit, you have to really graft and effectively work two jobs to get the one that you really want. To get that off the ground, you have to work another job to pay for it. So yeah, that's how I did it.
Yeah. I get asked a lot by people on how to set up a workshop and how to start up. And a lot of people, ask, what tool should I buy first? But I have come up with a theory, and let me know what you think of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lathe is the only tool where you can sort of make a project from start to finish. And you can make so much on a lathe. And I'm thinking if you can only get one tool, it should probably be a lathe. So then you can make bowls, you can make chess sets, you can make sort of lamp stands, and then you can sell them in craft fairs. And with the profit, then you can buy your next tool. So I do. And obviously wood turning is a really good process to learn at the beginning and understand, the grain of the wood. So I would recommend people getting a lathe first if they could only buy one tool.
That's a good one. I like that very much. I would say maybe, so if you were to say, I've only got one, I can only have one tool now, I would probably choose a router, because you can put that on a sled, you can flatten boards with it. You can do any kind of shaping, you can cut joints. In some ways they are the most versatile tool, but I do like your idea very much, just in terms of starting out.
Well, definitely in terms of furniture. Furniture, totally. The router would be perfect. Yeah, exactly. To apply what I do, we do a lot with just basic routers on sleds or whatever. We have a CNC, but we also still use a lot. Just the Makita 2 kilowatt routers are really handy. Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk more about the CNC later, because I just invested in one, but I have no idea how to use it yet. So it'll be interesting how you implement it in your work. Cool. But your ethos is, designing furniture and making furniture with a nature first perspective. Can you tell me more about that and how your design how that has influenced your design? Because I know I see a lot of organic shapes, especially with your hewn collection, using the branches of trees for the chair legs and the table legs. I find really fascinating. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so our nature first perspective is very much the idea that it's a sort of an inversion of the current way of consuming things in the world. So currently what we do is we say, we're humans, here's what we want, and then some business in the world somewhere will provide that for you and you pay it, and it's all about convenience first. And actually we put nature first in the sense that we look at resources and say, what's abundant and what does nature want to give us? And then we use design to turn those abundant or underused materials into something really desirable. So they still fit the business model and they still give us beautiful things, and it still makes life a rich place, but it stands less of a chance of depleting natural resources. So a kind of an example of that would be like, this is sort of outside of the work that we do, but if you look at the American black walnut as a tree, I think it's something like less than 2% of America's trees, yet highly desirable in current furniture trends, or maybe not current, but like over the last sort of 5-10 years. And when a client comes to us and says, oh, we've seen this thing, and they show us a picture of some American black walnut, and we sort of try and break down, why is it that you want that? And 2% of America's trees is still a lot of trees. I'm not saying that the American black walnut is endangered by any stretch. It's still a perfectly sustainable source, but it's just illogical to me that we would put so much emphasis on that when, for example, if we're talking about American woods, cherry is extremely abundant and out of fashion. And why is that out of fashion? And actually, if you stopped and rather than thinking about the decisions that we make being driven by magazine pages, if we drove those decisions by what actually grows in a woodland or a forest and what's available, then we would have much better outcomes for the environment. And I think that this, our business is set up in a way that's a microcosm example of effectively sitting down the guy who owns the American forest and the person who wants a dining table who's been reading, glossy magazines about interiors. Yeah. And if you sit them down in the pub and just say, look, this person wants a dining table, what trees have you got? They would very sensibly reach a conclusion that the person who wants the table will say, well, actually, cherry is quite nice, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Oh, and you've got lots of that, have you? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, great. Rather than saying, look, could you please cut down, one of the few walnut trees you have left in your woodland. So it's about sort of inverting that, idea that fashion and trends and convenience lead things, and actually saying, what does the natural world want to give us? And our kind of microcosm example is our woodland. We've got a small 4-acre woodland in Kent, and we manage that for biodiversity first. So we're actively managing it to help with nature conservation in the woodland and bring species into the woodland through good management. And then we look at what does the woodland produce and what can we then do with that material. And you referenced the hewn chair, which we also have benches and coffee tables and other things. And that's a really prime example of that. So the hazel poles, which are slightly too big to be useful for hurdle making. They're slightly overstood. They're not that straight. They're kind of not prime coppice material. It's a great way to use them is to use them in those chairs and so forth. And that actually taking that entire approach to the whole ethos of making it an object gives you a very interesting aesthetic, I think. It gives you a really nice looking chair with unique, bark on legs. So it's all about that inversion. And the only way you can do that is by really getting to know materials as habitat and resources rather than just seeing them as, materials as if it sits in line with concrete and steel.
Have you found that your clients share the same ethos, or are you constantly trying to educate, people in your beliefs more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Probably my main role is that education piece around clients. In recent years, they've, I suppose if you just sort of box them all up in one big box and call them like consumers or customers or whatever, the public, citizens, whatever you want to call them, I think everyone's become very interested in those stories in the last few years. So it feels like less of a battle. But I think, the sort of the sharp edges of those conversations come around things like knots and imperfections. And we think we have got our clients on board. We're quite selective as well, actually. We don't try and sell furniture to the wrong people. If people want perfection, if they want American black walnut, then to be honest, we kind of send them elsewhere. And we're quite choosy in that sense because there's no point in trying to make furniture for them. We're a little bit selective, but part of that is to try and take them on a journey as well. And that's a good way of understanding how receptive they are to that story. And then that's part of the, process of, defining whether we're the right furniture maker for them. Because there's lots of furniture makers who can make the things if they actually do want that. But if they really want to buy in because they believe in the values, then that's brilliant, and that's a job well done. And stuff like Instagram is brilliant for us being able to get that message out there. And that's why we talk about the sort of the why, the reason behind the whole thing more than the actual furniture, because ultimately we're trying to attract people who believe in what we believe. And furniture is a sort of secondary thing, really.
So you mentioned your woodland. I would like to know how that all started and if you've got any future plans for it.
So, the woodland's 4 acres. It's ancient woodland in Kent. There's mixed broadleaf woodland, coppice woodland. It's on a farm that I grew up on when I was, from the age of about 10. My dad bought the farm, and then he had to sell different bits off, but kept the woodland. And effectively, when I was studying my MA, I was looking at coppiced wood and trying to use contemporary design to find uses for coppiced wood. And I sort of was aware of coppiced wood from my childhood growing up on the farm. And generally in Kent, there's got, all the woodlands around where I was living were coppiced. And when I started my MA, because I was in Lincolnshire, I didn't really think of the woodland actually. And I was working with the Forestry Commission at their sites and things like that. And then when I moved to London, moved my business down here, I then remembered that we had this little area of woodland, and I was like, oh yeah, I wonder if we could actually manage that, because it last got cut when I was 10, so something like 20 odd years ago now, and it hadn't been managed since, so it was very overstood. And actually I saw that as an opportunity to bring it back into management, and then, as I mentioned earlier, design furniture with the byproduct of that management. And we've now brought it all into rotation, which means that we're now on the second cut of some of the hazel, which is great. And actually it's interesting how it grows back much straighter. It's sort of like it learns to be better, the furniture, which is nice. And the future plans are basically just to continue managing it and continue to add richness to that habitat. And increasingly we're trying to get the neighbours on board as well to let us go over the fence and manage their woodland too.
Well, I'm sure they would say yes to that.
Well, it's interesting because that's quite an interesting comment, because actually it's interesting how many people are wary about woodland management. People are wary about trees being cut down actually. And this is something which, as woodworkers, we all have to, be able to explain that there is no guilt around that if it's, from well-managed woodland. And I think we as woodworkers all need to do more to use the things that we make to convince people that we are aware of our source, and actually we are also aware that it's stimulating biodiversity.
I was going to say it benefits growth and encourages new life, cutting down trees.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously it's it's a hugely complex issue, which is difficult to break down. I think that's why people are wary of it. But yeah, broadly speaking, particularly in temperate hardwood forests like Europe, America, if they are managed woodlands, then, obviously I'm not advocating the cutting down of primeval forest in Eastern Europe, but generally, if it's a well-managed, either thinned or selectively felled, continuous canopy or coppicing, those are all things. And as furniture makers, we absolutely have a responsibility to know the absolute source of the wood that we're using. I think it's inexcusable to think that, there is still a trade in illegal tropical woods worth billions in the world. And, someone out there is making stuff out of that. And I think that's really inexcusable. And I think we all need to take a long, hard look at what we're doing.
Yeah. So I know you have a Logosol sawmill, which you probably use a lot more often than mine. But I'm imagining that must be one of the most enjoyable parts of your job, is slabbing up a tree and seeing the grain for the first time. Completely,
yeah. We actually don't use the Logosol that much anymore. We have now a band mill. We have a Woodland Mills HM 130 sort of trailer style sawmill. And then we also have Alaskan mills for really wide stuff. But yes, absolutely. Taking a stem of a tree and cutting it open is, it is that moment that connects the product to the habitat as well. And that's also the other thing that I love. And we often use it in the context of like the client's garden or maybe a park or something. We've been invited to go and mill a tree which hasn't been moved because they're heavy. And doing that with someone who hasn't seen that before, maybe it's the client's own tree, and I always get them to come along and see the first board off. So see the first opening, because that is magic. And someone who hasn't seen it before, and suddenly, you're creating moments of really special connection, which are going to make sure, they're going to ensure that, that object that you make at the end of it is going to become an antique of the future just by virtue of that material connection. It doesn't actually matter what it looks like, to be honest. It sort of becomes a very emotional thing. I remember when I was doing some sawmilling and I was cutting up a tree and I lifted the first, slab off and I looked at the grain and I thought that would be a really nice tabletop. And then I did the next one and I thought, now that would be a really nice tabletop. And every single one, I just saw a good tabletop. I'm not sure if, the wood speaks to you and you can see exactly what you want it to be. Yeah. And exactly that. And also what I always find astonishing is how much wood a tree will yield. And you end up kind of, like you say, you're with the client and you're like, what are you going to do with all of this wood? It's amazing. And tables, desks and coffee tables. And we've done paneling, we've done all sorts. Actually, we did a lovely project in East London a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, which was working with a local authority. It was Walthamstow Council, London Borough, Waltham Forest, and we selected trees from their kind of street trees safety program. So they have to fell street trees and park trees when they, pose a threat to the public, etc. And generally those trees are chipped for biomass because that's kind of the easy thing to do. And we worked with them, we found 20 trees and we milled these trees and then we made paneling for a public library. So it was like a public asset, a public resource used in a public space, which, any member of the public can walk in and appreciate our furniture, which was really amazing and totally enabled by the sawmill. And, you just, there's always that sort of slight level of guilt with furniture, about handmade furniture, about how expensive it is, and actually being able to do those sorts of projects where the public can go and use it was very satisfying. And the sheer volume of wood that those trees yielded was astonishing, but brilliant, and how much better than going into the chipper. So obviously you use a lot of locally sourced timber, and
I know you mentioned in your workshop you use no MDF, which is really interesting. I also saw online that you use no veneer, and I was wondering if you could talk more about that. And I'm assuming you're not talking about shop-made veneer for like bent lamination, or do you not do any bent lamination?
We don't really do bent lamination. If we were to laminate something, we'd saw it ourselves. And funnily enough, actually, with the new band mill, we're starting to saw veneers, but we won't be using them in a sort of traditional, veneering over substrate board. I don't know. I think I just never really liked it, to be honest. And actually, at university, I refused to do the veneering module because I said to my tutors that William Morris wouldn't approve. Seems very difficult as a thing to say, but anyway, and I got away with it, I think, because I said that.
Really?
I don't know. I don't really like the principle that, basically our principles are about saying we should be celebrating wood of all kinds, right? So we should be celebrating imperfections, and we should be happy with and welcome things like ash that's got, dieback, as long as it's not, as long as it's still structurally got good integrity, etc. Or oak that's got staining from metal, or whatever it is. We should be welcoming those as textures into our homes. And, if I'm talking about integrity and honesty, the idea of taking a cheaper substrate and covering it in a thin, cut veneer of whatever it is, just doesn't quite fit our ethos. I don't have a problem with other people doing it. Although it does pose a problem, I think, in terms of, I believe that veneer and ply and MDF have all degraded the inherent value that people see in solid wood, because what's happened is, because veneer and ply have come about from the convenience of stable material, that has made consumers very wary of if their kitchen doors move, for example. It's the thing we always get phoned about when we make a kitchen and the wood settles and it cups a bit or whatever. And, you've got Blum hinges, which totally neutralize that. But people are used to wood being entirely and, uncompromisingly stable. And so I do think that it has been problematic in the way that we've, in the way that it shapes our approach and attitude to wood. I think it's distanced us from the raw material. So I suppose, having said that, I don't have a problem with people using it. Maybe I do.
So I was wondering, with jig making or template making, do you not use plywood at all? Or what do you use?
We would use plywood for jig making. Absolutely, we would. Yes, there's no point in using anything else there. I mean, that is driven by cost, and we do use probably one sheet of MDF every few months as a new spoil board for our CNC, because the vac works through the MDF. So I can't say it's zero.
Well, that's excusable. We've had to forgive you for that.
You. Yeah, thanks for forgiving that. But generally speaking, in our furniture output, for example, like with drawer bottoms and cabinet backs, it's cedar of Lebanon, which is traditionally used there. Yeah. The other place that we would use ply, of course, is in kitchen carcasses, because actually, in that sense, that really is the best thing for the job. And we're quite open about it. We don't veneer over the ply for the carcasses. We leave it as birch ply, and we tell the client that it's birch ply. So we're really open and honest about that. But I think, it's obviously you've got solid doors, solid lipping, solid worktop often. It's not an absolute thing, but it's like a general principle that actually, if we're going to have wood on show, we want it to be the honest and truthful wood that it actually is.
Out of the Woodwork is brought to you by Axminster Tools. Nobody is more passionate or knowledgeable about woodworking than us. A market leader in mail order tools and the machinery industry, we offer a friendly and personal service to thousands of woodworkers all around the world. Whether you're a trade professional, business owner, education leader, amateur DIYer, or a hobby enthusiast, we share your passion. Discover more about Axminster Tools. Visit www.axminstertools.com. I believe it was last year. I'm wondering if you're doing the same thing this year. I assume you are. You mentioned you wanted to store 100 tons of CO2 in your furniture by the end of the year. Did you accomplish that? Are you on track to do it again this year?
We did. I can't remember the exact figure. I think it was like 110. I think the library significantly contributed to it because it was so much material in one job. We did a couple of structural jobs this year, which again, they're fantastic. Like we did this, we did an extension for a client's house where we made the structural glue laminated beams from mixed British hardwoods, broadleaf woodlands. So yeah, I think we're on track to do it again this year. I haven't actually checked. I should always check before I come on a podcast because I know I always get asked about that.
Really?
but yeah, I'm pretty sure we are on track for it. It's one of those things which it was an ambitious thing to set, and I think we should probably put the limit up each year. But we've come pretty close to getting it over the last few years, and if not, we have. I think we got it last year, and I think we're on track to get it this year.
That's really good. And another way of being sustainable that I haven't seen anyone else do before is your Mycelium project experiment with the lampshades and the stool. A few of my listeners, I am sure, won't know what that is, so I'd love you to explain that whole experiment.
Yeah, Mycelium is the fibrous growth of a fungus, and it's typically found in soils. And listeners may have heard of this concept of the wood wide web, basically connecting trees through these fibers, which are fungal fibers. It also exists in wood, so it's the bit that sort of grows through the tree and begins to decay it. And you may have even seen mycelium when you buy wood in from a wood yard. If it's got a knot or a shake, often it's a split in the crack in the wood, and you'll see, if there's a bit of spalting nearby, you'll often see a little web of almost like spider's web or something, and that is mycelium growing through your wood. And if you have a bracket fungus, for example, the fruiting body that sits on the side of the tree has those fibrous structures going into the tree to feed effectively. So what we do is we take the principle of the strength of those fibers and use it to bind together wood chip. And that creates a composite material between the mycelium and the wood, which is, I guess, not dissimilar to a sort of like polystyrene kind of material, but a little bit stronger, I would say, and a lot softer, and it doesn't sort of squeak when you touch it.
Yeah.
And we grow lampshades predominantly with it. We have it's very glamorous to call it a lab. It's basically like a little storeroom with some kitchen equipment in it. But yeah, and that whole project was about trying to use from our coppice woodland, trying to use there's a species of tree that we have in there, which is goat willow, or sallow, which is not really strong enough to use in furniture, but we still coppice it and still have to find a use for it. So actually, one of the things that makes it sort of not so useful is its perishability. It rots very quickly in the wood, and because it rots quickly, that means it has little defense to fungal attack, and therefore it's perfect for inoculating and chipping up, inoculating, and then packing into molds and growing into different shapes.
Yeah, I was very interested to find out that obviously the lampshades don't last forever, and you mentioned how furniture doesn't need to last forever. You mentioned we're in a world that has everything. When you first came up with this product, was the clientele, thinking, why am I spending this money if it doesn't last forever? And did you have to do some explaining?
Yes, that's a really good question. So the principle, I guess, around, compostability is very useful around things like packaging, which mycelium has been used in that sort of realm. But a bit like wood, if you keep your lights dry and, if you chuck them on a compost heap, yeah, it would disappear probably in a week and a half. If you leave it indoors, it actually, because of a bit like a piece of wood, it's exactly like a piece of wood. If you we have medieval buildings that are still standing because the timbers have been kept dry. And it's that same principle, as long as it's an interior environment, it doesn't matter. So most of our clients buy and they can expect a decent lifespan, actually.
So with the use of sort of using the mycelium in your furniture, I noticed you also use some leather in your chairs. Mm-hmm. How is using multimedia in your furniture a new thing? And do you want to explore that more?
Yeah. it's yes. I mean, I'm still very much wedded to wood. That is my primary material. But I think sort of what I've been doing in recent years is kind of stepping back from too narrow a view on why wood is brilliant and actually looking at the habitat and ecosystem that it comes from. And that has so I've become very interested in the principles of sort of regenerative design, and wood is the most regenerative material that we can use, but there are others that sit within it. And so if you think about, using material from a biodiverse woodland habitat, what else can you get from that environment? If we know that, having intervening in natural cycles by harvesting trees benefits biodiversity, are there any other interventions that we can make which benefit biodiversity and also give us materials? And I've taken a great interest in sort of rewilding recently, last sort of 5 years or so. And, one of the things that rewilding has taught us is that putting herbivores into any kind of scrubland or woodland or pastoral environment in low densities brings great environmental benefit. And the reason for that is because actually, herbivorous disturbance is totally natural in woodlands, but we have hunted those animals away and then we've domesticated those animals and then put them in fields, which is sort of only one part of where that animal might naturally want to exist, and we've kept them out of our forests. So actually, places like the Knepp estate in Sussex have shown that, low densities of free roaming animals actually they set up ecosystems which can bring back rare and endangered species like, the nightingale, for example, benefits from the scrub that is created by the low density browsing of the cattle. So that sort of begins to make the cattle, almost a product of good woodland management in some sort of way. And actually that's when I started looking at the leather, I was thinking, what else can we get from these wilder landscapes? What else can we obtain? And so we made a lounge chair and magazine rack using hides from cattle which have browsed woodland. So they've got amazing scratches in them from, barbed wire fences or brambles or whatever it is. And they've lived a very natural life.
The character must be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's like the knots in a piece of wood, it's that same principle, celebrating the imperfection, which tells a story basically. And it's been really brilliant. As I say, I am a maker, but I'm also a product designer. And so to bring in other materials in a way that doesn't compromise on our principles is really exciting and interesting. And, I'm really driven by that because I adore wood, but I don't want to be limited to only one material. It's what limits me is a set of principles. And, so I want to work within that as much as possible.
Yeah. You mentioned designing and making. Would you consider yourself more of a designer, more of a maker, or even an environmentalist more? What's your main one?
That really depends on what day of the week it is. Yesterday I was planing up a load of green oak for a tree house that we're making at the moment, and just loved being on the planer. And in that moment, I was very much a maker. Last week I was designing a landscape for a hotel, and very much a designer and loving that. It's really hard. I'm extremely lucky to have a job where I can, satisfy all three of those parts of what I love doing. And I've worked really hard to build that. And, so I'm going to dodge your question and not pick one.
That's all right. So in terms of the work you do, you mentioned you do tree houses and the cladding and all the furniture. Can you tell us a bit more about the ranges you do, and also I'll touch on to digital fabrication. Have you always used that? Because I know some woodworkers used to be against it, but have you always loved the idea of using the CNC in your work?
That was on the CNC. I think as soon as I could kind of afford one, I was really interested in what it could do. It's interesting, and I mentioned the arts and crafts movement earlier, and I often wonder about what William Morris would think of a CNC machine. Would he think it was a great tool? I think he would have used it. Yeah, I think he would have saw it as an opportunity to alleviate labour, and I think it depends on, it depends on the setting, doesn't it? And that's sort of what we're quite cautious with is, are we replacing quality jobs with a robot? No, we're not. We're actually enhancing good quality jobs with digital fabrication. We're making more interesting things. We are reducing arduous tasks. So yeah, I, in principle, have never been against it and always been quite interested in it. And then as soon as I could afford the first one, I went halves on one with my neighbour, Jan Hensel, who's another furniture maker. He's sort of down the corridor from me. And it was game changing. And we sort of bought it not really knowing what we'd do with it, and actually ended up creating really interesting work as a result of it. We had a big commission from Burberry to create these massive screens, and they were originally going to be woven, but then we thought actually it'd be really nice to take it outside of the sort of, because we do a lot of weaving with wood. The screen next to me. And so what we did we used the CNC to cut, instead of, it was a diagonal weave, so it was inspired by the texture of Thomas Burberry invented the fabric gabardine, which is a diagonally woven cloth, which is what sort of was the original product of Burberry, I think, if my history of Burberry is correct. Anyway, so we wanted to do like a diagonal weave, and the best way to do that was to cut lap joints into these massive 8 foot by 8 foot screens. And there was something like 350 lap joints per screen, and we had something like 12 screens. So can you imagine trying to do that by hand? It would have just been impossible. So we didn't buy the CNC and end up turning out tabletops and stuff, which people could otherwise make. But we ended up, taking the workshop in a direction which was much more interesting, much more challenging, just by virtue of having this additional piece of kit. Do you have one? Did you say you got one?
Yeah, I just bought a much smaller one than yours, I'm sure. And I just finished setting it up and getting used to the software. I'm not sure what software you use. I use VCarve. So I'm learning that at the moment. But I've got so many ideas of, furniture, and it's going to help with template and jig making and so many things I can do with it. So I can't wait to give it a go. I haven't heard of anyone halving a CNC before. So do you find yourself fighting over it? What happens if you got a long carve that you need to use, but he wants to use at the same time?
We just do mornings and he does afternoons. It's really simple. It's really easy. Okay. And we start an hour earlier than him anyway. So it works quite well. So we start at 8, he finishes at 6. So actually there's only really, sometimes we're mega busy or he's mega busy and we negotiate. But generally, if you've only got it in the morning, you just use it accordingly.
Do you do all the coding yourself and all the computer work, or do you have a team to do that?
I can do. So we use Fusion 360. We draw most things in SketchUp. We then translate it to Fusion if it's a component part that needs to be CNC'd, and then we write the G code in Fusion. I can do, but I generally don't. We have 3 people in the workshop who use the CNC, and we're trying to get away, although it's quite difficult because they are techie bits, but I think it's really important to get away from the idea that you have like a CNC machinist. It's sort of one person who knows how to use it, because actually I really believe that it should be approached in the same way as the planer thicknesser or the table saw. It's just another tool in the workshop, and everyone should know how to use it. The realities and practicalities of getting everyone trained and keeping everyone on top of it is quite tricky, because as with all machines, I think with our first CNC, which was a really old, it was like a 30-year-old machine, it was really rickety. There were so many nuances, and it would only do it if you put the USB in a particular way round, and it only liked this, and you had to hold the the pendant in exactly the right place. It was like, so it was like having a classic car. There was only one way you could drive it, so we did have one person for that.
Probably didn't even end up speeding up the process because of all the work you have to do on it.
Yeah, totally. Which is exactly why we just had one person. His name was Jack, and he just knew the CNC, and actually it worked very well. But we've got a multicam now, which is a little bit easier. But it's still, there is a lot of nuances and things to remember in the process. So yeah, that's kind of why we have 3 people, which is sort of a third of the workshop who use it. But every apprentice that comes in, we're trying to make sure that they actually are trained on it. And then hopefully as the business grows, because we get apprentices, we always have an apprentice. So hopefully as the business grows with our apprentices, there'll be more and more people who can use it.
So what tool in your workshop do you like using the most? Are you more of a hand tool woodworker or a machinist?
I think it's very easy to over romanticize the hand tools. There is something very nice about, I really like those days where, so we work a 9-day fortnight. So we have every other Friday where people don't come to work. And I really like, if I ever do have to come in on one of those days to make something, because, being the boss, you never really have time off properly. Yeah. I love those days where you're just at the bench with hand tools and I can have something like the Cricket on the radio and, just use I've got some very sentimental tools I've got some Norris planes, which are my great granddad's. And so sort of like using those, with the Cricket on, it doesn't get much better than that. But then at the same time, I absolutely love our 4-sided planer. That's such a great bit of kit. When you switch it on and you get all 4 motors humming and they sort of harmonize with each other. It's like having a choir in the workshop and getting that really tuned right, and then throwing through, whatever, like 20 cube of lovely English ash. It's can't beat that as well. So I'm again not giving you a completely definitive answer. Not
no, I completely understand. I think a lot of woodworkers now classify themselves as hybrid woodworkers. So a bit of hand tools, bit of machinery, getting the best of both worlds.
It's not very 21st century, is it, to pigeonhole yourself too much? I think we live in an age where people are very plural, and woodworking probably is unhelpful for woodworking to be purist in one sense.
Yeah. So what furniture? I mentioned it earlier, but I got distracted with the CNC. So what range do you? Is there a favorite range you have, or can you tell us a bit more about the styles you do? So half our business is product. So, whether that's, we've got a kitchen range called Sawyer. We've got desks and benches from our Underwood collection, which you mentioned earlier, which is where we have the coppiced wood in the round with the bark on. We have a collection called Bayleaf, which is made of mixed British woods, and it's in the sort of mid-price range of what we offer. And the idea of that is that everything in that collection is customizable, because quite often we make stuff to order because we're in London, we don't have a big warehouse. So everything is made to order pretty much. Some of our products, we store the batches, the components for the batches. But the idea is that, everything's customizable, and we switch the wood about because we want that to be a fluid conversation around what the wood is. So it's not necessarily even if you get a London plain table, the chances of finding plain exactly like that one in the photograph is so slim. So we try and keep that open so that we can always, have a conversation around that. And the other half of our business is Bespoke, where we'll make kind of things, through from, whatever, big sofas through to tree houses or jewelry boxes or whatever it is. We'll sort of span the scales. So we're always making something interesting, something new, and but I do love the product because I love that sense of batch production. I think that's really important, and something which is, there's such satisfaction in that. I don't know, how you feel about that, but when you get multiple orders of one thing, there's that sense of the efficiency that's brought about from your own effort is really it's really satisfying. And I think it's a great way of trying to bring the price down as well and make that furniture more accessible. I'm sort of leaning more towards my own product range because when you've got the time to design your own range and really refine it and make multiple prototypes, And, the idea of batching things it sounds like great fun. And when you do one-off commissions, I do enjoy them, but it is a much longer process and there's more risk of it not being exactly how the client envisioned, and there's a lot of back and forth going on. So I think you probably end up losing money more on the bespoke stuff than your own range, because you've got all the jigs made with your own range, and normally people buy multiple if it's a chair. So yeah, I think there's more money in the your own products.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the amount of times where, the basic principle is that you never really make money on a learning curve, do you? You're sort of always paying for that extra bit of education around how to do that thing you've never done before. So yeah, that is where the product comes in, because it balances that out. And I would never want to lose the bespoke side, because that's what keeps things really interesting. But they balance each other so nicely.
I agree. Yeah. And now there's one final thing I wanted to discuss with you, was this amazing project called the Wish List, which some people might not know about. So can you tell us your involvement with the Wish List and what that experience was like?
Yeah. So the Wish List was in, I think, 2014 or 2015. And it was a London Design Festival project, originated and sort of pulled together by Evelegh, who are quite a big player in wood. They're one of the few people who have the money to sponsor projects, which is great, and they often have representation at the design festival. And so I was one of 10 emerging designers, paired with 10 well, I don't really know how you describe them. Sort of like, they were 10 significant names in the design industry, from Zaha Hadid, Paul Smith. I was partnered with Terence Conran. Richard Rogers was in there. Yeah, it was really a brilliant project in the sense of mentorship and collaboration across generations. And like I say, it was exhibited at the V&A, and the principle was that the established designers would commission a piece from the emerging designers, and we all worked together and made them in the workshops at Benchmark in Hungerford. And so everything was made within 2 weeks as well. So it was like a really intense period of making, and we were all together at the same time. We were camping in Terence's garden. It was just an amazing project to be involved in. And Terence wanted a desk which sort of was his title was Getting Away from It All. And it was the idea was that he could, and this is to quote him, to get away from dogs, wives, and journalists was what he wanted to escape. And he wanted this thing where it was like a desk, and his idea was that it would have a nickel rail and a cotton curtain that he could shut himself away. I think he's in his early 80s by this point, so I think he's sort of had enough of noise and bother. And I really amazing experience to receive that brief, and then terrifying experience to then have to respond to it and effectively say, actually, Terence, I don't really like the nickel nickel rail and the cotton curtain. I've got this better idea, which is I want to throw a load of oak in the river at the bottom of your garden, soak it, and then cut it up and weave it into the screens, which he liked. But yeah, actually having to turn around to Terence Conran and say, actually, mate, I want to improve your design. It was pretty nerve-wracking, but a good life experience.
Well, I think the next time they do a wish list project, someone will be making you something, and then they might have to improve your design.
I'd be a terrible client, yeah.
Well, Sebastian, I really enjoyed chatting with you. For anyone that wants to see more of your work, where can they find it?
Our Instagram is a great place to find more about what we're doing. Sort of currently, my handle is @Sebastian Cox Limited, and our website is a brilliant sort of repository of resources, and all the products are on there too. And really proud of our website, actually. We photograph our woodland with drones every season, and the website always reflects the way the woodland looks now. So it really is like a portal through to the origins of our business, which I really like.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I asked the right questions.
No, it's great. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much
Nice
for your time.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, bye.
Catch you soon.
Join us again next time for another episode of Out of the Woodwork. For more episodes, to listen and subscribe, search for Out of the Woodwork on all major podcast sites, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more woodworking project guides, demos, tools, reviews, and more, visit www.axminstertools.com.